Good afternoon, America, and welcome to Carry the Loads Lessons from the Front, the podcast that seeks to inspire us all just to do 1% more for our country in honor of the 1% who defend us from the bad guys every day. I'm your host, Todd Boeding. Today's guest is Matt Thomas, former United States Army cavalryman. I think is probably the best way I'm going to say that. And, you know, I put out there, Matt, and somebody responded and they said, I want to know what was the name of Matt's horse.
Well, you know, thanks so much for having me on the show, Todd. This is it's such an honor to be here. You know, I hope I can live up to the standard of guests that you've had. You've had everybody from Green Berets to Navy SEALs in this show. But to answer your question, the 9th Cavalry Regiment has obviously changed the horse types over the years, right? Went from horses to air cav to what was my horse when I was in was the Bradley fighting vehicle. So that was probably what I would say the name of my horse was.
So did y'all give her a name? Did your vehicle have a name?
You know, I wasn't a driver or a gunner on the vehicle. I was a dismount infantry. So I just went for the ride. I don't remember if any of our guys gave any of the Bradleys names. That's a good question. I don't remember that at all. I don't think so, but it could have been, and I just didn't know about it.
So
but it was a great horse to have during the Iraq War, because obviously it was great to go for the ride to our target and then have great cover and concealment and as well as firepower.
So the military, we in the military have a sick sense of humor. And I know that on the Marine Corps side of the house, the guys who drove the Amtraks and the guys who drove the LAVs, and for those out there that don't understand what those are, the Amtraks are the ones that would go in the water, get up on shore, drop the back of the vehicle, and then we'd all storm out and storm the beach. And then the LAVs were very similar to your Bradley vehicles. They were they were wheeled vehicles. And those guys who drove those vehicles, they called us crunchies. And the reason
that's pretty sick.
No, those crunchies is not really one of those things that I want to describe, but everybody use your imagination. And that's, that's the sick sense of humor. So did they call you guys anything like that?
No, we referred to ourselves as legs and dismounts. I might've been referred to as a speed bump a time or two.
Okay.
But the Bradley fighting vehicle is actually probably closer to an Amtrak. It was a track vehicle. So it could go through water to some degree, and it had a ramp. There's a picture of it in this painting back here.
Yep, I see it.
Bradley with a ramp drop. The title of this painting is Drop Ramps. It was commissioned by our sergeant major, our battalion sergeant major, to kind of commemorate our tour there in Baghdad.
And so when you got into the Army, and I know that from talking to you previously, your story is very similar to a lot of us. You ended up in the Army because you and school didn't agree with one another at the time. So you sought that which would give you the best direction and opportunities in life, and so you ended up in the Army. So did you have a choice as to whether or not you were going into the cavalry?
No. So, I think I told you before, one of my inspirations for joining the service was reading the book Black Hawk Down. And my drive for going in was to go out for the Army Rangers. And, I went through airborne school, I went through Ranger indoctrination program. And unfortunately, with the other 70% of my class washed out of that. What your recruiter doesn't tell you when you enlist is that if you wash out of that, the Army can put you wherever they want and assign you wherever they want, right? And then, when you're transitioning out of there to go to another unit, they let you write down what your first 3 choices are. And naturally, I wrote down Hawaii, I wrote down Vicenza, Italy. I wrote down all of these, these glorious duty stations. Of course, I didn't get any of them. They wound up sending me to Fort Hood, Texas, with the 1st Cavalry Division, which, it's not glamorous, but, it was actually an excellent unit with a lot of history. And so I was really proud to be in the 1st Cavalry Division and serve in that unit.
Yeah, so the cavalry, though, it really is truly interesting. We're not here for a history lesson, but I do think it's interesting because, like you said, it started off, the cavalry was, started off to be horses, and, people, there was a phrase that came about over time, which was, call in the cavalry or send for the cavalry, or the cavalry's, coming, because that was the most efficient aspect of the military that we had up until mechanized units, and it was the one that was most feared by the standard infantryman. And then as we move on, like you pointed out, it became more of an air opportunity, and so the horses, as you said, became birds, right?
Right. Yeah. So my memory, and I'm not an expert on the history of the unit, but if my memory serves me correctly, it went from horses to air cav. I still think that there's an air cav unit in existence as part of the 1st Cavalry Division. And then it became a mechanized unit, or the horse became the Bradley. There might have been some other vehicles like armored personnel carriers in there, that preceded the Bradley fighting vehicle, but I think ultimately it wound up being the Bradley. And then at some point, I think they had a Stryker unit, which did wind up being a more mobile, like wheeled vehicle. So it's changed a lot over the years, but there's always been some element of, at least symbolically, a horse involved. And they still have a horse unit, a mounted unit that does, kind of like parades and a lot of ceremonies and stuff like that.
So I'm going to kind of fast forward before we go backwards. And, we're talking about, one of your big things is transitioning, people training out of the military. And if I understood you correctly, the reason it's become, very much of a hot topic for you is because you didn't have the same challenges that a lot of people had. And off air, so to speak, I asked you the question, why didn't you have the same kind of challenges that everybody else had? And your response to me was, because you never lost sight of purpose. You never lost, your purpose all along was very different than a lot of guys.
After 4 years in the infantry with a year deployed to Baghdad, and having that experience, I was super focused on, after ETSing. ETSing is just a fancy way to say, getting out of the service. I was super focused on getting back to school and completing my degree and just trying to do, like, meet my potential and do the best that I could. Right. And I think like what made transitioning probably easier for me is that I kind of, I was a pretty decent student in high school. I just had that year after high school where I just didn't do very well at college. But I had the capability to do well. And so I think that made it, a lot easier for me. And I think making my military experience kind of relative to all of the experiences I had after getting out also made it a lot easier to transition. I went from, I just literally had come out of a war zone, being shot at and the enemy trying to kill me and my brothers. And after going through that, I think kind of getting out and going back to school just felt easy, right? It didn't feel very challenging. And so I kind of monopolized that, realized that, kind of monopolized on that, and it just carried me forward. And I was just super focused on that mission. And, I think I had told you earlier as well that I was certain that I was going to die over there. I just had the mindset that I'm probably going to get killed, right? Because if you don't have that mindset, if you don't accept the fact that you're going to get killed, you really can't function while you're over there. At least I couldn't. So I just kind of accepted the fact that I was going to die. But I did pray to God, while I was over there, and I said, God, if you get me out of this, I promise that I will dedicate myself to a life of academics and service and just living my life to the best of my ability and never slacking off, right? And so lo and behold, I managed to get through the war and get out in 2005, and I wanted to make good on that promise, and so I did.
Do you remember when you had that discussion with God? Do you recall the circumstances that really, got you to it? Was it in the middle of taking fire? Was it surviving it and then saying, okay, now I owe you?
Yeah, no, I think it was just cumulative of all of the numerous ops and missions that we went on, on a daily basis and on a nightly basis, and just kind of going out each time and coming back. And I can remember, I can't remember the exact moment or date or after what mission, but I do remember, after coming back from a mission and laying back in the bunk in the barracks and saying those prayers on multiple nights, and not only praying for myself, but also praying for the guys that I was serving with. So I would say that maybe there was no specific moment, but it was the culmination of a lot of different moments.
Was that common, do you think? Were you one of many that would go back and kind of assess everything and process it and then talk to God?
I would be surprised if there weren't other guys, praying and asking for strength and help from God and saying, God, if you get me out of this, I'll do whatever you want, right? Afterward. It's kind of funny. We never really talked about it. And I don't think I ever saw anybody praying, but I'm sure, we were all thinking the same thing. And, I think every individual kind of handles that situation, differently. Some people, were probably just so focused on the mission that they never even thought about it. Some guys maybe focused on the mission, but, thought about like, well, I'm getting closer and closer to this deployment being over. I hope I can make it out of here.
So I've always found it to be very interesting. There are typically two camps, when it comes to war and it comes to the reaction you had. There are those that say what you said and have that discussion. And then there are those who go the complete opposite direction and say, you know what, if there was a God, there's no way that he would allow things like this to happen and for people to go through these things. But the camp that I find interesting is those who said, Lord, please get me out of this and I'll never do anything bad again. But then once they move past it, they kind of forget those promises.
Yeah.
So why were you able to, because, one of the things that you told me was you were able to keep that sense of purpose, and you made a commitment, and that sense of purpose, as I told you, I lost my sense of purpose coming out. And how are you able to hold on to it the same way?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know. I just, I've always done my best in life just to try to keep promises. And if you're going to keep a promise to anybody, right, like the ultimate person or the ultimate being you want to keep a promise to is God, right? So not to turn it into a religious discussion, but I think because I remember, saying those prayers, specifically like on a routine basis, saying, hey, you get me out of this. And then I wind up getting out of it. It's like, oh, well, you made good on your promise, so I'll make good on mine. And then I just think I was just so relieved, to be back. And I think making good on that promise is just what drove me forward.
What did you see over there in your time in Baghdad? I mean, that if you got out in 2005, you were obviously there with the fall of Saddam Hussein, the tearing down of the statue. What did you see over there that put you in a position where you thought you were going to die?
That's a great question. Well, so first of all, I think we rolled into Baghdad on April 2nd, I think, 2004, after kind of prepping all of our gear and everything in Kuwait, about a month or so prior to that. And I went out on a resupply mission. I was in a gunner and a convoy to go to Camp Anaconda and bring back supplies to our forward operating base. And our convoy was hit by a massive IED, and it just blew everything off of me except, my Kevlar vest, right? It was just this massive explosion. And despite it being this massive explosion, we all walked away. Everybody in that convoy all walked away with very minimal injuries, right?
Wait a minute. You said an IED went off,
mm-hmm.
and it knocked all of your equipment, all of your gear off of you, except for your Kevlar vest.
Yeah, my helmet, my goggles. If I had anything hanging on the vest, it was blown out of the vehicle. It pretty much destroyed the barrel of my M240, which is mounted on the top of the vehicle, and I didn't know it at the time. So I wound up dismounting from the vehicle and switching to a, because it was an ambush. It was a really weak ambush because there was follow-up fire after the attack, but it only lasted maybe about 15 seconds because our gunners, and I was in the center of the convoy, our gunners were in the rear and the front, returned fire, and the enemy dispersed out of this palm grove on the side of the road in like 15 seconds. So by the time I dismounted from the vehicle to go join in, it was over. So it shattered the windshield. It put golf ball size and ball bearing size holes all on the side of the vehicle. My driver was this guy named Paul Levesque that was maybe a $140 out of the shower, kept control of the vehicle. He had got hit. His face was bloodied, and our TC, he had got hit, but none of us had any serious or fatal. Obviously, no fatal injuries. And like I was saying, the barrel of my rifle, I didn't know it at the time, but it was bent and contorted. So I might have gotten even more injured if I had fired that 240, not knowing that the barrel
absolutely
was destroyed, right? And this was on our way out to Camp Anaconda. And, even though we got hit, we pushed forward, pushed through the ambush, responded, and we continued on with the mission, went and got supplies and came back. And I believe that route was it's a very famous route called Route Irish, I believe, and they used to call it IED Alley. I think that was Route Irish that we were on the way out there to do the resupply.
Okay, so I want to, I don't very often do this, but for some reason I feel compelled to kind of paint this picture a little bit more. So when you were on this convoy, how many vehicles were on this resupply convoy?
I'm going to say there was 10 to 12, about a dozen.
Okay, so about a dozen vehicles. And the classic ambush is you let the first vehicle pass, or the first element.
Yeah.
Then you hit the main body, which would be about vehicle 2 or 3 for y'all. And then that way you sever the very first vehicle from everybody else. Everybody else behind that second or third vehicle is completely immobilized and can't move. And so they're sitting ducks. And what I'm hearing you say is that you were pretty much right in the middle.
Yeah.
So you would have been either right behind, I mean, you were a couple of vehicles behind the explosion. And what I heard you say, though, I can understand where y'all might have survived, but the people up front, vehicles 2 and 3, nobody died there.
No, there were no casualties, no fatalities in that attack, in that fight. It was there was actually 2 daisy chained IEDs. They were huge. There was so much chaos after it all happened, and we kind of pushed forward. I didn't have time to see it then, but we drove the same route back, and just to be honest, it's probably the safest route because you know what I mean. You already got hit with one. There's probably not going to be another. But we drove the same route back, and I got a chance to, and I was up out of the LMTV as a gunner again. Saw these 2 hot tub sized craters right next to each other, and I think we were just really lucky. I think that had the vehicle, had it been detonated either a second earlier or a second later, we probably would have saw casualties, more serious casualties and fatalities.
And that kind of puts things in perspective as far as the conversations that you began having, because it probably would have looked very different for you if someone had actually, if you'd received casualties, KIAs. My guess is it would have put it in a completely different perspective.
Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know if it would have changed much, because that was just week 1.
So that was your first week in country.
Yeah. That happened in the first week. It was the unit that we were actually on that mission with, the 1st Armored Division, the unit that we were relieving, and because they were transitioning out, since it was in the first week, it was obviously kind of set the tone really for the rest of the year for me personally. But there was a lot of other stuff that happened, that we could talk about for hours. There's a lot of other stuff that happened after that, including, actual loss, right? Losing some of my closest friends and closest brothers in arms.
So let's talk about those that made it through, and I'll ask you later about who you're carrying, to this day. Guys you just referenced, I know. The individuals though that you saw transition, and again, that really kind of got us talking here. You had a lot of success transitioning, but a lot of guys don't. And I know you've seen a lot of those. You've had a front row seat to a lot of those difficult transitions. Why do you suppose everyone coming out of I shouldn't say everyone, why do you suppose that the vast majority of service members, especially those who saw combat, have difficulty re-entering the civilian world?
Well, me personally, I don't know if I could say that it was a vast majority. I don't know. I don't have the data handy to know like what percentage of people that go into the service, struggle when they get out, or struggle to transition, when they get out. I'd be surprised if the majority weren't more successful, but there's still a significant number of soldiers that struggle when they get out. A lot of them, I think, tend to be in the combat arms. And I think in the combat arms, if your MOS is infantry, right, it's really difficult. At least back then, it was really difficult to translate your military experience into civilian world experience, right? I think a lot of guys struggled with how can I take this super intense, just tragic and oftentimes horrible experience, especially if they were deployed, and how can I translate that into some kind of direction after I get out, whether it's a career, whether it's going to school, and I think, a lot of the troops that are in combat arms just struggle because they just kind of came out of something that is probably the most ultimate experience that they're ever going to have in their lives. There's probably nothing more outside of skydiving and bungee jumping, and not even that, right? That you're going to experience that can really match that. And so I think when they look at the opportunities before them when they get out, I think that they're bored, right? They find things boring. I think that they don't have the structure that they once had. And a lot of them, I think, are affected by various levels of PTSD, and PTSD, at that time in the mid 2000s, was something that it wasn't like a new concept, but it was getting a lot more attention, but it still wasn't a thing that was really being very diagnosed. At the time, it took years for a lot of guys filing claims for VA claims to get claims approved for PTSD. Right. And so I think that there's a spectrum of PTSD as well. I think a lot of people have different levels, different struggles with PTSD, some mild, some really severe, depending on what they experienced, right? And so I think you take a combination of all of those things, and you get this kind of recipe for struggle after you get out. You don't know what to do, right? And like I told you when we spoke previously, it broke my heart a lot, and it's something that I didn't really realize how heartbreaking it was to me until about 2015 when I moved out to Texas and started getting involved with Carry the Load. I think at that point is when I realized, wow, the past 10 years have been going really well for me. I've certainly had struggles, but nothing that can even compare to some of the issues, people that I talked to and, some of the gentlemen that I served with were experiencing.
So when you talk about, tragic, heartbreak, eye-opening, what is one of the relationships that you became aware of in someone's tragic struggle that you could, if you were going to educate America to, hey, you need to be aware of this stuff, because awareness, just like we talk about with Carry the Load, awareness is the most important mission that we have, making sure that people understand the reason why we honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice on Memorial Day. Okay, so now you're transitioning using the same exact method. We got to make America aware of this first. And the reality is much of America does not understand the struggle that you just referenced and some of those tragedies. Can you share with everybody one of those stories that sticks with you, that you go, golly, if we could just solve issues like this or situations like this, we wouldn't have nearly the problem that we have with these guys transitioning?
Yeah, I won't name anybody specific, but I can rattle off several stories that that I've observed, that I've heard about. If you take a look at there, there's a really good picture of my platoon when that we took in Kuwait, and it was like our last day before we were flying back to the States in like April 2005. And it's our whole platoon, right? And there were, there were a couple of guys that weren't there, because, they were killed in action. But then if you were to take that same picture today, there would be a few guys missing, right? That were in that picture because they succumbed to, their struggles that they had after they got out, that they committed suicide or something else happened. Right. And, I think I told you that, at the time that, I was ETSing, Facebook was just becoming a thing. Social media in general was just gaining traction.
And ETS is end of.
Right. I forget exactly what the acronym means, but it's basically a fancy way of saying you're getting out of the service. Your service, it's end of
time in service.
end of time in service, I think, something like that. But
yeah, we used EAS, end of active service. But
yeah. So at that time that I was getting out, social media was just a thing, and a couple of years later, social media winds up blowing up, and everybody's got Facebook, and so I'm reconnecting with all these guys that I served with, and and mutual friends that served, that were clearly struggling because, and I think that they were reaching out, kind of indirectly by, posting some really dark stuff and just posting very publicly, the stuff that they were dealing with. And we had guys that were dealing with alcohol and issues and drug issues, and guys that were dealing with depression, and some dealing with some really intense PTSD, and even guys that I met that I didn't serve with, that I met along the way, that had maybe served a year later or a couple of years later, experiencing the same things. Several of the men that I served with in 2005 wind up going back to Iraq in I believe it was a 2007 deployment, and there was a lot of loss there, and a lot of tragedy, and so I think in having some private conversations with some of these guys on like Facebook Messenger, and talking to them, and just realizing that, wow, this person's really dealing with a lot. I mean, I think at the time I kind of blew it off like, oh, this person's just crazy, right? Like, or just, must be drunk or high or something like that. But I come to realize when soldiers start committing suicide, and the 22 kill statistic is very real. I think my platoon is representative of that statistic. It makes you realize that these are very serious issues. So I think the culmination of all of those conversations that I had, all of those social media posts that I read, the conversations I had over the phone, conversations I had with some guys when we got back together for reunions, just made me realize how much struggle that there is in the veteran community, especially post combat experience.
Well, and what you're talking about, Matt, is what I latched onto what you just said was that you've been through all of this, and you've been through it with these guys. You know better than anybody what these guys are dealing with, but yet the things they're saying, we weren't even really trained to deal with that brother to brother. We may have gone through some classes and whatnot, how to recognize certain things, that death is a part of what we do. But like you said, you're listening to him say some things going, oh man, he's being a little crazy right now. Or when in reality, that's the struggle coming out, and it's the hand going up in the air saying, I need help.
Right.
And I think that's really, where I was going with this more than anything, that, it's important for us as Americans. We don't necessarily need to be fixing it. Okay. I never saw combat. I never had a shot fired at me in anger. It took me being involved in this organization. It took me talking to a lot of these guys to understand the depression, the suicidal thoughts. Although those are things that I don't personally relate to, they're very real. And we have to be aware of them. And when I see something like this, now my antennas go up. And this is what I want Americans to understand. No one's asking you to fix it. But you've got, just like you said, you didn't even recognize it at first, having been there with them. But Our antennas have to go up, and we have to make people aware. Folks like 22 Kill that you mentioned, folks like Farm that I know you're a big part of. Certainly anyone at Carry the Load will utilize the no wrong door concept. You just get in through one of these doors and we're going to get you where you need to be. But it's important that Americans understand, when you see that, don't write it off as someone being crazy or just drunk or just high or whatever the case may be, because the reality is that's just their way of acting out their challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And And, you kind of just wanted to touch on something you said that, we're not really asking America to fix it, but I think Americans, even if you never served before, can do really, really kind of small things to kind of help. Right. I'll give you an example. So you had mentioned farm and, I'm not as involved with farm as I once was, for, a bunch of different reasons, but like, I really love that organization. It was founded by, several gentlemen that I had served with and, several leaders that I'd served with that I admire and respect. And I love their program and what they're doing. And the idea behind dirt therapy, getting your hands in the soil and having a purpose and, raising crops and learning how to grow and garden and farm as a form of therapy, right? As a form of healing, right? And I think, participating, and donating to organizations like that and is one really small way that I think, your average American can kind of help, right? Another organization that I've recently gotten involved with is, I'm not sure if you've heard of them, the Warriors Keep. So the Warriors Keep, they do outdoor adventure therapy for heroes. Oath, right, is their slogan. And I recently, a few months ago, got to go on an expedition up a mountain with them, and just walking, and just hiking, as a form of therapy and camaraderie. You don't have to be a veteran to do that kind of stuff. Just kind of participating in that kind of stuff to lend a hand to struggling veterans is a great way that I think Americans can help. I think awareness is important, but it definitely has to be more than awareness. I think, just doing small things, I think, really helps.
Well, that's so important. And really on the heels of the pandemic, Americans in general, I mean, I've seen a lot of statistics lately, the depression, the loneliness, that, the isolation.
Oh, yeah.
And we were joking, I got caught in traffic coming home that, that I think, a lot of people are, they're no longer recognizing COVID. They're all out on the road. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It really, truly is. We're social animals, and it's important that we surround ourselves with, with other people. As much as I enjoy, this kind of interaction, it doesn't replace, a face-to-face meeting with you and looking you in the eye and shaking your hand. That's what makes us human beings. And like you said, the things that can help as Americans, you don't have to have served, but a lot of times it's something as simple as, tell me your story. People one of the biggest, therapies is just being able to tell somebody
absolutely
your story.
Yeah.
And so, that's the other thing that I would throw out there to, to people watching this. Just ask. People will tell you. Don't be afraid to ask them about their background. Hey, thanks for your service. Will you tell me what you did? Because that's, we hear that all the time. Thanks for your service. And that's where it stops. And I just want to encourage people, keep going, ask them more. Ask them what they did, because there's a good story there that's therapeutic for somebody to tell.
Yeah, sharing the stories is one of my favorite things to do each year. Carry the load when you're just walking with people, right? Like walking and talking is just, it's probably one of the most therapeutic things I think you can do, even as not a veteran, right? Just as a human being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Matt, I really appreciate the time. You've been very gracious. You've really stirred my thoughts on a lot of things, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to do that. One of the things that's very important to us here at Carry the Load is that we always remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice, and I know that you've got at least one or two people that you carry with you to this day. So would you mind sharing that with us, who you're carrying?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I carry with me all of the men that made the ultimate sacrifice from 1-9 Cav headhunters in the 2004-2005 deployment for Operation Iraqi Freedom. But in particular, I carry with me Sergeant Jack T. Hennessy. Well, if you give me a minute, I can tell you a little bit about Jack.
Please do.
Jack was someone that I actually started my military service with. He and I were in the same platoon in basic training. We were in the same platoon at airborne school. We both went through Ranger indoctrination program together and washed out. And probably even more fascinating is that we both got assigned not only to the same division after washing out, but also the same battalion, the same company, and the same platoon in Fort Hood, Texas, with the 1st Cavalry Division. So Jack, lost his life in a firefight during our deployment to Baghdad in support of OIF, and I carry him with me every day, and he is absolutely one of the motivators for just my life in general. I kind of push forward and give 100% in his honor.
Man, that's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, and thanks for all your insight. I mean, you've got an interesting story in that it's very similar, but it's got, to a lot of us, but yet it's got a couple of unique angles to it that really gave me cause to pause and think. So Matt, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for all of you out there in America, I want to let you know our next episode is going to be Tuesday, November the 2nd. Tanner Iskra, former Marine who also hosts a podcast for the VA, and it's called Born the Battle, BORNE, Born the Battle. Tanner is quite the expert podcaster. I'm striving to be like him. Maybe one of these days when I grow up, I'll be as good as him. But so we'll see you again on November the 2nd, and that'll be at 5 p.m. Central. So until then, my name is Todd Boeding, and I'm carrying all the members of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, who recently gave their lives getting folks out of Afghanistan so that they could live a free life. They selflessly gave theirs. So my question to you is, who are you carrying?